firstly, thank you for your great response to last week's show where I interviewed doula and aromatherapist Gail Friedman. Unfortunately, a gremlin did manage to get in right at the end when I gave you her WhatsApp phone number. Hopefully you did manage to get hold of her on her website, but for those who still want to try on WhatsApp, here's her correct number and you can get hold of her via WhatsApp anytime on that number. So, one thing that I often get asked about, and that many people in my kind of work, or psychologists, or anyone who works with people in their daily lives every day, often get asked about purpose. What is my sense of purpose? What is my purpose of life? What is the purpose of my life? Purpose, purpose, purpose. Very important question that so many people ask. It seems as if even the idea of purpose is somehow even built into nature. We can certainly see that relentlessness of life's willingness to live. There's some who've suggested that the way that molecules work is they even create a sense of purpose in themselves. For us as human beings, we often think of some kind of greater purpose as related to our own purpose. Well, of course, and as ever, there isn't one magical solution to what is your purpose and how to find it, but I thought I'd share with you some ideas about purpose that perhaps will give you the opportunity to reflect in your own life and find a greater sense that you are following a purpose that is meaningful to you. So, of course, psychologists and philosophers have always tried to resolve the issue of how do we find purpose. The importance was even stated by the great philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." In other words, as long as you've got a purpose, whatever the circumstances are, you can rise above them, you can survive, you can persist. That was something that was also illustrated by the psychologist Viktor Frankl, who wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning during his imprisonment, about his imprisonment in the German concentration camps during the Second World War. And Frankl noticed that people in the concentration camps, those who were likely to survive, were those who had some kind of a goal or purpose. He was trying to reconstruct a book that he'd earlier written and that had been lost when he was arrested. Other people, he said, had a purpose related to their future, even the purpose related to seeing people they loved again. The concept of a purpose actually gave people, in that example, a reason to live. So that's, of course, what Nietzsche is also referring to when he says, as long as you've got a purpose, you'll basically endure any circumstances. For all we know, maybe that's nature's plan. Maybe that's one of the things that makes us live. But as individuals, we need to experience that sense of purposefulness because, as Frankl is even suggesting, without a sense of purpose, we often despair. One of the things that frequently happens to us is that, we grow up getting told that once we reach adulthood, we must find our job, you must know what you want to do in life, you must know what you want to do with the whole rest of your life, and you must go off and do it for the rest of your life. And most of us don't really know where to start with all of that. And that's how we end up at psychologists and astrologers saying, what is my purpose of life? And to me, on the receiving end of that question so often, I'm always struck by the sense of how could it be, how could it work in the cosmos that we have to ask someone else our purpose in life, that we don't inside ourselves know what it is or feel what it is. I mean, the truth is we don't. There is no mystery about that. Perhaps the truth is that we've kind of lost some of that sense of purpose, lost some of what we had before. Human beings by nature seek direction and guidance and leadership. And maybe some of that has been lost along the way. Indeed, we can easily get caught into the wrong direction by following others. So following is not necessarily a good way to have a sense of purpose. Certainly, if we can strongly identify with the person or idea that we follow, and certainly you have a sense of purpose there, and it's good enough in itself. It doesn't have to mean that their purpose or their philosophy has some greater meaning beyond that. It does not have to. But it does seem as if we need the sense of direction or focus a little bit beyond ourselves. When we focus it entirely on ourselves, it doesn't seem to work so well. A great example is the purpose of life is to seek happiness. Well, happiness is badly defined, if definable at all, and one thing for sure about happiness is that, like all other emotions, it is transitory. It's going to move on to something else. Something else is going to come along and replace it. It's intermittent, it's temporary, and it depends on other things. Often depends on things outside of ourselves or depends on special circumstances. It would seem as if, over the last couple of 100 years, things have shifted around a bit so that minimizes our sense of purpose. And basically, our culture and society has become increasingly self-centered, probably because over the last couple of 100 years, as we replaced a lot of our religious ideas and a lot of our beliefs about how the cosmos and nature works with a very materialistic scientific point of view that ultimately draws the conclusion that we are the masters of our own destiny, we are the gods of our own world, our own bodies, our own lives, our own cosmos. And while a lot of that idea might make sense or appeal to the modern mind, it has led to a loss of social structure. One thing that is really apparent in the world today is that we don't have the social structures that our ancestors enjoyed. From the obvious things like religion, which could have given people a sense of purpose or something like that, to shared causes, the cohesion of a particular society, as well as things like conventions, the rules by which we live. Those are handed down from generation to generation to basically make it easier to live as a human being. Sometimes, of course, rules and taboos also need to be addressed, changed, gotten rid of. We're not suggesting that all rules are automatically fantastic. But this idea is that having lost those things, we kind of feel a little bit cast adrift. We don't know what rules to follow. We don't have rules to follow anymore. So what I'm describing is a world that's increasingly become about myself. Very apparent, and as we know, social media being so responsible for helping create that. It perhaps gets even more emphasized by the idea that we have nowadays that money and fame could be the motive. That's a goal. Money, wealth, success as fame. Yes, they can be motives, but it's just worth remembering that people who tend to achieve the highest levels of financial and influential success are very often people who were not motivated by that. Look at the Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, Steve Jobs. There's numbers of them who achieve very high levels of wealth and success and who were never motivated by the money or the recognition that garners along the way. It's the effect of having pursued their individual purpose and goals that allowed them to achieve the success and wealth. So I think the lesson that we get out of that is that we have to decentralize from ourselves, that this focus on the individual is something that's causing a lot of pain and destruction to our greater sense of why are we on this planet. We don't have to know the cosmic meaning of life in order to find an individual meaning of life, because sometimes living in a world that is less religious and more chaotic and doesn't have the beliefs that sustained our ancestors, it's easy to see ourselves as being in a world that lacks meaning, or at the very least we don't understand the purpose of. But it was the Stoic Marcus Aurelius who pointed out that you don't actually need to know the purpose of the universe in order to have your own purpose. He said, the universe is huge and timeless and endless. He said, if there is a purpose, and that God has a purpose, and that purpose involves us all, then great. And if there is a purpose, and God has an individual purpose for you, you don't know the difference between those two things. So great. He said you don't have to know the hows and whys. You don't have to know about what the greater purpose is. Whatever it may be, you're obviously a part of it. So just get on with your purpose. You don't have to know what that is. And I'm going to come back to that idea later on, because for me, that thought actually solves a lot of the question of what is purpose all about. So what happens is that by the time we're ready to leave school, we've got this idea of I'm supposed to have this job and I'm supposed to have this clear purpose. And what often happens is that in our early 20s or in early adulthood, we try and achieve early success because we must. We must get financially independent and independent as an individual. We've got to make our place in the world. So we're motivated by the pressure of society that says you must succeed. And so we try and establish success, which we do, but that's not usually based on our purpose of some kind. It's usually based on the purpose is to get financial security, to have money, to be an adult, to all of those kind of things. The result of that is that by the end of the 30s, we are feeling negative emotions like despair, like meaninglessness, like depression. The more we compare ourselves to this abstract idea of a sense of purpose, the more we see I don't have that. It might seem that other people have a purpose, and why don't I have that? Just because some people has it obviously throbbing like a bright red light above their heads doesn't mean that someone else should, because two people are not the same. So we have to locate our own sense of purpose in some way. We mustn't model it after it's some great big idea. The most common model that people seem to use or choose for that sense of purpose is I need to do something that helps other people, which is a very noble purpose, but it's very easy to fail in that because we've got to deal with our own stuff so much. Sometimes I think, could it really be that the purpose of a life is to help another life? It's nice, but it doesn't 100% make sense to me. Perhaps the Stoics put it a little bit more clearly in a way that does make sense. And in the Stoic philosophy, the common good is what's important. I often think that one of the problems today is that we're misguided into thinking that as long as I do things for other people, I'm a good person. As long as I do things for other people, I have a sense of purpose. And while doing things for other people is great, it can easily distract us from, we still have to have something which is our own purpose. And so certainly the other people thing is the common good. If I do something which contributes to the good of us all, then I'm still aligned with whatever the possibilities of the cosmos are. Whether there is a great overriding purpose, whether we each have individual purposes within that, whether there isn't any clear sense of purpose, when I'm aligned to the common good, I'm aligning myself to whatever the answer to the purpose question is. And I think that was Marcus's genius in answering the question that way, saying, well, align yourself to the common good and stop worrying about is it this or is it that, and then you will have a sense of purpose, because he's taking somewhat the natural point of view that says, well, presumably, if there is a purpose to the human species, to there being a whole human species, and since you're a human being, well, then you're participating in purpose. Well, that certainly speaks to the idea of common good, and that certainly is part of the purpose that we can find for ourselves. But we have to get back to living in the 21st century, where we've got these pressures that say, you ought to be doing something that leads to depression and despair. The ought to be doing something is not the most important part of it. It's the fact that it can lead to such negative emotions that means we do have to deal with it in some way. Research shows that people who have got a sense of purpose have much greater self-esteem and self-confidence, and they even live longer. Alternatively, other research has shown that when people lack a sense of compelling purpose, they're in danger of thinking that their life is a failure and that their life is futile, that they are futile. And so, that sense of I need to be doing something purposeful is what Frankl was saying, how not to despair. He was in the most despairing possible situation, in a concentration camp, doomed to die. And he used the sense of purpose to get himself beyond that. So the danger of failure and futility is something that emerges when we don't have a sense of our individual purpose in some way. If we keep on directing it beyond ourselves, even with the greatest of intentions, it's easy to lead to anxiety. So for example, if I decide to focus on humanity, and I think it's helping others is the purpose, and then I look at, say, starving people or people who are in extreme socioeconomic or warlike or whatever the circumstances may be, we can feel a sense of powerlessness when we try and do anything about that. And it's easy to feel anxiety because it feels like I'm not doing what I should be doing, I'm not fulfilling anything. And by locating it outside of ourselves, we've created unhappiness for ourselves. So that's why we need to locate purpose within us, and that if our purpose involves helping others or the world out there in some way, then it must be about the common good. Let me do something that benefits us all, including myself. And that gives a better union between the idea of I must have a sense of purpose, but at the same time, purpose includes, outside of myself, helping others in some way. So what can we do to try and enhance that sense of purpose and to try and solve the problem where we end up feeling despair and pointlessness and all of those kind of things along the way? So there are a couple of questions we can ask ourselves that help us find that sense of purpose. One of them is, what do I do anywhere in my life that makes me feel really in the flow? In the flow is this idea that psychologists have, that it's an experience that we have when we're doing something that feels like the right thing or feels that it comes naturally. In the flow feels like I'm doing my thing and it suddenly feels meaningful and part of, even if it's only because I can do it so well. So you can even ask yourself, what do I love to do? And that's a very important question, because what do I love to do is not the question we get told to ask when we want to find a career to leave school. Even if we do ask that question, for so many people, the pressure to rather choose something that earns good money or that will easily get you a job or something overrides what do I love to do. So it might be true that the sensible job earns a lot more money and security in the world than the one that you love, but the sensible job leads to despair and depression by the time you're in the middle of your life, and the one that you love doesn't. And the question is, which one is worth living with? Which one is able to be lived with? How long can you live with despair even if you are making a lot of money? So we do need to at least get to the point of what gets me in the flow, what floats my boat, what does it feel like I love doing this, what does it feel like I do this even if they weren't paying me. And in all of that there's nothing significant, it's just that it feels like I love doing this. It sounds like it feels selfish, but it isn't about selfishness. It's more about the idea that you were born to do that. We naturally do what we were born to do, like everything else in nature. Everything doesn't question. A plant doesn't question, why am I here? It just gets on with being what it is. We so easily confuse purpose with some kind of external achievement, an external measure, and amount of money, and all of those things like I was saying earlier on, that it's easy to lose the me in that situation. And like we've seen with happiness, even if it's true that purpose is associated with external pleasures, they are transitory, they can change amongst themselves, they can change because they're not in our control. So again, it comes back to us. So what do I love to do? What was I born loving to do? Even if it was sitting in my room drawing, that's what I loved as a child. Find a way to bring that into purpose. Purpose and profession don't have to be the same thing. If you've got a profession, you can find purpose somewhere else if your profession isn't something you'd want to change, can change, should change, or any of those things. I'm not saying we all need to have the most purposefulness in our profession. It's simply that we need purposefulness in order to succeed at life. Might be different with what we're succeeding as a profession. So the question is, what was I born to do? What was I born loving? What just makes me feel like me? It's often an activity that we did when we were children. It's often something that makes us feel in the flow. It's often something that has its own motivation, where we don't need an external motivation. I just love doing it. So the motivation is to do that thing. And finding those things, perhaps in your profession, maybe ideally in your profession, but also elsewhere in your other activities, in your everyday activities, and so on. That's where we need to look for our sense of purpose. From my perspective, and getting back to what Marcus said, that idea that we're born to do something and that we're doing, and we're kind of inclined to do that anyway, is something that is very key to the idea of purpose. Everything in nature is born with a purpose. The purpose is not necessarily grand. So I can compare it with cells in the body. Every cell in the body does have a purpose. Every cell in the body has a unique, special little purpose that, seen in its own light, is trivial and boring and could even lead to despair. If your purpose as a cell is to produce one part of one molecule, one atom for one molecule, or one piece of something, it can feel like you are a conveyor belt, that you're one hammer in a conveyor belt doing one job over and over again, and then it's easy to think of purposefulness. Imagine you're the cell thinking about this. What a cell is doing is critical to the functioning of the whole body. The cell does not have to worry about what other cells are doing, although it does have to worry about those things that are common good. I've got to produce my atom as well as the next one produces their atom, because we all need this molecule. Neither one of us is capable of producing the molecule on our own. I'm not producing a molecule for them. So that's my example of, we must have common good. It's not about helping someone else, it's about doing something that is of the common good that I'm a part of as well. And I'm a part of something, and that is the lesson of the cell. The cell is a part of a body. It doesn't know the rest of the body. It doesn't know about the purpose of the body. It has no relationship with the purpose of the body. And yet, if you remove that one cell, the body's functioning will be reduced. So the idea of common good and the idea of purpose, the idea of born to do, is that whatever the cosmos is, whether it's created for a specific purpose, whether it's a mysterious random collection of things that we don't understand, we are part of it in the same way that individual cells are part of a body. And individual cells only need to assume that all they've got to do is do what comes naturally as fully and as best as possible. If every cell in the body did its own thing as fully and as best as possible, then the purpose of the body will be achieved. So that's where purpose lies for us. It doesn't have to be meaningful. I don't have to go out and change the world or do something that makes everyone go, ooh, wow, that's amazing. All I need to do is do what I was born loving, born able to do, born feeling I could just do this all day. Do that thing as fully and as best as possible, and you will be fulfilling the purpose with which you were born. You can assume that the reason why you are you is in order to be you. Be you. Do what comes most naturally and do it to the fullest. That's the purpose of life. Well, no doubt a topic we could revisit often and probably answer lots of different ways. One day I'm sure I'll come on here and tell you another idea of a purpose of life I might have. But for now, that's enough to think about, and we will revisit the idea of happiness in the near future soon. So be sure to stay tuned, watch again next week, same time. See you then.